So for number 3, we know that this is an exponential function. So when we scan across, in terms of transformations, we see that there's no negative right after the equals, so there's no reflection across the x-axis. We then hit the 4, and because it's bigger than 1, we know there's a vertical stretch. We don't really care about the base right now. That doesn't impact any type of transformation in terms of stretches, shrinks, reflections. But then we look at the negative in front of x, and that means there's a reflection on the y-axis. There's no number off on the right, so there's no up or down movement. And if we set what was up near x equal to 0, we would have no left-right movement. Then the asymptote for exponential growth and decay is the number off on the right, y equals 0. Y is linked with range. That's why our range is going to be y is something to 0. Because our graph ends up being above the asymptote, we say greater than. Greater than's for above. And then domain has to be the all reals. You can plug in any number for x without getting an error. In order to get the table of values, plug your equation into your calculator. And remember, you can hit trace, you can hit any x value you want to plug in, enter. And if you want a y-intercept, you can either plug 0 in for x and solve, or you can hit trace 0, enter, and it will give you the y-intercept 0, 4. Remember, when you do your asymptote, an asymptote y equals 0 is horizontal, right? Horizontal asymptote. Now for this next problem, as we go across the top, we don't see a negative after the equals, so there's no reflection across x. The 4 means vertical stretch. Then we look at the value in front of x. There's no negative, so no reflection across y-axis. But the 2 means that there's a horizontal shrink, opposite of intuition. We set what's up by x equal to 0. We get a half, so it goes to the right a half. The number afterwards is up or down. Positive is up 1. That number on the right is linked to the asymptote for exponential growth and decay. So we get y equals 1. Then y goes with range, so we know it's going to be y is something 1. Greater means above, less than means below. So when we look at our picture, our graph is above. That's why we said y is greater than 1. So the domain is all reals. Remember again to get your table of values, plug in your equation, hit trace, enter, and you will get out ordered pairs, or else you could do it by hand. So for example, if you want to do one by hand, let's say we plugged in 0 for x. We would get 4 times a half raised to the 2 times 0 minus 1 plus 1. Then it would become 4 times a half raised to the negative first plus 1. 4 times 2 to the positive first plus 1. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 would get us 9. So we would get the ordered pair 0, 9. So you can plug in by hand. Lastly, y equals e raised to the x minus 1. Okay, so we have base e. We know this is exponential growth because the base is about 2.7. So this spot is e, right? So we know it's exponential growth because there's no reflections involved. And we know that the asymptote is the number off on the right. Y equals -1. Y goes with range, so it's going to be y is something -1. Our graph is above, so we do y is greater than -1. Domain is all reals. To get our table of values, we can hit trace, hit an x value, enter. You can do any ordered pairs. Y-intercept, trace, hit 0, enter, because you're plugging 0 in for x. And then just at the bottom here, there's a reminder of a random equation and all 6 possible transformations that can happen. So in pink here, after the equal sign, you see that negative. There's a flip across the x-axis. The next number, if it's bigger than 1, it's a vertical stretch. If it was a number smaller than 1, like a half, it would be a shrink. Remember, the base doesn't have to do with the vertical stretch or shrink. Then the negative in front of the 4, in front of x, has to do with the reflection across y-axis. That's in gray. In green, the number in front of x, opposite of intuition, has to do with horizontal stretch or shrink. 4 is bigger than 1, so it's a horizontal shrink. If it was -1/2 x, then it would be a horizontal stretch. and then the number off on the right, plus 5, means it goes up 5. Then left-right movement, you set what's near the x, all in red, equal to 0 and solve. And because you get 0, this should say there's no left or right movement.